Welcome to WeedBudzTV with Rye and Christine. And Christine. And we're going to talk about presidential marijuana policy.
It's my favorite subject.
Is it?
It really is. I can geek out on presidential politics. I've been geeking out on presidential politics since I was 14.
Since you were 14. What makes a 14-year-old excited about presidential politics?
What's even worse was I was a 14-year-old excited about Michael Dukakis. But I was very much a true believer in the Democratic Party, and I was 14 years old. I was always like fired up and excited about politics. My dad would come home from work. We would watch the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather, and my dad and I would debate. And my dad's a Republican.
Okay.
So, of course, as a kid, then I was always like trying to do the counterpoint. And my Republican father made me the best Democrat possible because I was coming to the dinner table every night arguing my point.
I love that. My grandfather, who was an immigrant from Russia into Canada, into the U.S., just watched the news all of the time. And when I was a kid, I thought I'd get one over on my grandmother. I would wait for her to fall asleep, and I always slept in their room, and I'd army crawl out. And I'd go around the house, and I would get underneath his chair, so he wouldn't know that I would, at least I thought he wouldn't know that I was there, and I'd watch the news. And then, 2 o'clock in the morning, he'd kick me, and then I'd get up and I'd go to bed with him. And then the next day, he'd be like, "So what'd you watch last night?" And we would talk about it. And so I also, at a very young age, was introduced to debating. Now, I think we probably are similar. Sometimes I just fought for the sake of fighting.
Yeah,
But that
was it. But I can remember going to the library card catalog and looking stuff up because I was going to pull out a book. For some reason, when you're a kid, there's this magical power of I'm going to go to the library, I'm going to go to the card catalog, I'm going to get this book, and I'm going to show it to my dad. And one of my favorite books growing up was The Camera Never Blinks by Dan Rather.
Never read it.
Oh, it's an amazing book, and it talks about having a public life. And I still refer back to that book. But I can remember my dad going, "That's just one guy's opinion." But I'm like, but it's a published book.
Right.
But that kind of culture taught me to question and to always research in the political world, to show up with your receipts. So I'm a receipts gal. Receipts. So we do have to look at the receipts and the past policy. And as they say in our personal lives, that past behavior is indicative of what the future results are going to be. And no more does that present itself than presidential politics.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. So as a Democrat, active in presidential politics, and an activist and lobbyist for marijuana policy, you must be so excited for Joe Biden.
I am not riding with Biden. There's no way I am riding with Biden. And both advocates and the industry, we have to step up at this point in time. Is the Bernie Sanders plan for marijuana perfect? No. Did it address individuals already engaged in our industry? No. But for the majority of the country, Bernie Sanders' plan for marijuana is superior. Biden has not presented a plan. I do want to acknowledge, especially as a woman, that Tulsi Gabbard is still an active candidate for president, and she has done more than any other member of Congress to promote our issues as an industry. We have in Congress Ro Khanna, Earl Blumenauer, Ro Khanna of California, Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez championing our issues, that we can't ignore what they've done because we have a new bright, shiny object in the room. But marijuana policy is not just our industry, how we're forming that industry in different states, but it's also the social justice component.
Absolutely. That
every day when I'm working in the cultivating field or even in the dispensary field, I am doing things. I had this moment where I was throwing out 25 pounds of fresh, frozen marijuana, which in itself feels like a crime.
Sounds like a crime.
It sounds like a crime. And as I'm doing my government logs to put that stuff out, I was realizing that there are tens of thousands of people in prison today doing less than what I just did, and that was a harmless, innocuous transaction, didn't hurt anybody.
Right.
And those people didn't hurt anybody.
Well, and you're talking about 24 pounds. We have people in prison that were nowhere near 24 pounds, nor 24 grams.
Yeah, it's people in for less than an ounce.
Right.
People separated from their families. As a mother, the next range of social justice policy that we need to do when it comes to marijuana is ensuring that parents are not separated from their children over their consumption, because we have our criminal laws, we have our civil laws, but then we have a whole other set of laws of the family court, and the family court system is unique to each state. So in some states you could legally consume, and it's up to the discretion of the family court judge as to if you get to have visitation with your children.
Wow.
Or if you're going to be ordered supervised visitation with your children, or a form of quasi visitation where your children can be dropped off at your house, but you can't drive them anywhere.
Right.
So we have to address what is intoxication using cannabis products, and we have to address what is fair and safe parenting while using cannabis products, because right now that bar is so extraordinarily high. And if you are wealthy, you get your kids.
Right.
But if you're not, and you're a parent who is just using it for simple pain relief, at the end of the day, anxiety relief, you're going to lose that, and then your children are going to suffer, and your family doesn't get to remain intact.
Well, and that's just a horrible cycle that we see ultimately impacting the children.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the policies that the presidential candidates have in front of us right now, I don't know that we really have many answers from
Joe Biden's policies harm children, and they harm families.
So what about Joe's policies are concerning to us?
Joe has never met for-profit prison industrial complex that he's ever refused. That the for-profit prison industrial complex formed under his watch, continued under his watch. The situation in our country where we have two systems of justice, those for with money and those without money, that started under his watch. And that will continue under his watch. And this campaign of we're going to return to normalcy, well, normalcy in Joe Biden's mind sucked for American families. And now we have families that their choice is either addictive opioids, which are going to kill you.
Right.
You can only use that. The end result of opioids, at some point, if something else doesn't kill you, you are going to get killed because your body cannot handle those for 20, 30 years. It's a long, slow death. Or we can use cannabis. You do not overdose on cannabis. We do not have deaths related to overdose of cannabis. That families are going to be placed in that position yet again. That regulators are going to be more of leaning toward being more restrictive on our markets, not as welcoming, and much more paranoid. And I've lobbied for marijuana policy now in 8 different states. And what part of the art of lobbying is understanding the motivation that politicians have as they make rulings. So if you're a Democrat and the tone of your party is Joe Biden's normalcy, let's not change anything, maybe let's go back because we're scared of demon weed. If demon weed is the tone being set from the top down, it makes it that much harder for us to say this is safe, this should be legal. It's going to set us back another 20 years. And we've fought so hard to get here. And what I've seen, the stories I've heard from families where they're not worried that their father or their grandfather is going to overdose anymore. Right. That the level of anxiety experienced by their 25-year-old daughter who's having trouble getting through college, that's gone down, and that she's no longer dependent on the psychotropic medications. That those types of things, we're going to stick families back in the closet. And one of the most powerful things I ever heard from a judge that I worked with is that we're only as sick as our secrets. And we're becoming healthier as a society right now, that we're able to talk openly about criminal justice, and we're able to talk openly about the use of cannabis, and even in some circumstances, the use of mushrooms. Right. that why would we want to go back to that closet? Closets are for clothes. That we fight so hard not to have closets in the Democratic Party. Why do we want to tell whole populations of people, you need to climb back in there because we're going to recriminalize and we're going to re-shame? And shame is the least productive emotion that is out there for human beings.
Absolutely.
Shame does not transform you. Shame does not encourage you. Shame just keeps you down.
And when you have a broken spirit, it's just a cycle that you can't get out of. And there's nothing that you can do to be productive. And so what about Bernie's policies give you hope that we can regain some, I guess not normalcy, but we can increase normalcy with marijuana policy?
I believe that Bernie Sanders' policies will have a more skeptical eye toward what the profit motive is on policies that are presented to his administration. Sure. That we don't get anyone coming up saying, here's a solution to a problem just for the altruistic end of it. In politics, we have, here's a solution to a problem. It may have been an artificially created problem, but this is how I want to make money from it. And fundamentally in our country, one of the changes since the late 1980s has been this privatization, the shrinking of the civil service workforce, the shrinking of the number of professionals in our world out there to help other people that are working directly for our government because we have outsourced it to third-party companies that have a profit motive. Right. And I hear about that profit motive pain from individuals, from social workers, all the way to parole officers, that every little piece of our government that could be outsourced and a corporation to take a little piece off of it. I believe that because it started under Joe Biden, it was Joe Biden's donors are engaged in this business. That's going to continue. So my faith in Bernie Sanders is that he's going to look at where's the profit motive in this. I don't believe that Bernie Sanders will ever be at the table with private prisons. And right now we keep patting ourselves on the back as Democrats. We've eliminated these private prisons. Like, no, we haven't eliminated them. They haven't gone away. We haven't imploded those buildings. Right. That those are just going to take on a different form. And I believe those companies are waiting for what their next form can be, because marketing, and you and I both have a lot of experience in marketing, and one of the geniuses of marketing is manufacturing consent. Right. And we're just going to see these things continue to happen in our society, rebranded and remarketed. Under Joe Biden, I think that Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who's not beholden to those industries, that he still wants to see our community safe. But we have a war on drugs that has failed. I believe that Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who will openly declare that that war on drugs, which is really a war on people who have no other choices, because the rich have always been able to write themselves a check and get out of any trouble that's related to drugs if they even get caught at all. Right. That Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who will declare that this war on drugs, the war on working people, that it's over and we need to find other solutions that make us safer.
When we talk about that, one of the things that I think is important when we're looking at policy and we're vetting the candidates coming forward in this next election is the topic of expungement. Because I feel like there is no marijuana progress, really, if we can't get that right. Because so many individuals have been impacted over the last few decades that how do we have a productive and inclusive culture with those individuals still sitting in jail?
Well, we have to talk about expungement in two different categories. So I personally don't believe in expungement for you if you did something such as murder or physically harmed another human being. I don't believe that those are aspects of our movement, and they're not marijuana motivated. Those were money motivated. Right. That for individuals that were imprisoned because they were selling some weed to support their family and it was nonviolent, we should have expungement for all nonviolent offenders. We may need to, in our negotiating of that policy in different states, talk about a level of supervision that first year out. We also have to talk about that prison in itself is crippling and harmful to the human spirit, causes PTSD, causes a situation where if we've imprisoned someone for 10 years over a marijuana conviction, what do we as a society owe them to get back into their lives? They have lost years with their children. They've lost years with their family. They've lost years of socialization. And think about how much technology has changed.
Absolutely.
In that time. They just go into a McDonald's and look at its touch screens, its things. Imagine if you've been in prison for 20 years.
Right.
How do you process that? So and people, and Joe Biden Democrats, this is the real divide, still believe in revenge over rehabilitation. And we have to shift that policy. So that's another reason why I believe in Bernie Sanders, is that he sees it as rehabilitation, moving our country forward. Joe Biden sees it as revenge, punishment, bad people.
Right.
Where my view of the world, and I believe Senator Sanders, is people get pushed into bad situations, and they may not have always handled them in the legal way that was of that day and age. But we also know that in our past history, you used to be able to be imprisoned for simply being homosexual.
Right.
So as policy evolves, our nation needs to evolve, and we have a big clash between the generations right now. That I know I have children. I know my adult children are even more progressive than I am. That it's really a battle between, I feel like I'm stuck in the middle as a 46-year-old woman between my children in their 20s and my father's generation in their 60s and 70s.
Right.
And we have a responsibility, those of us in the middle, to make it possible for the younger generation coming up behind us, but also remind them of how bad it used to be.
Right.
And sometimes when I'm talking to people who are in their 70s, they want to believe that every person they know who went up the river was a bad person, and somehow that made them a better person.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think about transparency, and you kind of mentioned that, is that over the last 10, 15 years, transparency has increased dramatically. Mm-hmm. You know, we see these things with Joe and Bernie and the current President Trump, where they make these gaffes maybe 30 years ago. And then the argument's made, well, if they're going to forgive or work on expungement or whatever, where's the line for them? You know, can they get a break? You know, in the last 20 years, hey, I said something stupid. Can I correct that in my future policies? So do you think that there's a double standard at all in terms of us as activists saying, hey, these are the wrongs that you guys need to fix? Mm-hmm. But now we have three candidates who've all misspoken at some point, and that transparency comes out as negatively impacted. Do you see that being an issue in this next election?
There's a double standard between the political class and the activist class, and it's active every single day. When you work in politics, you have that constant friction between the two camps in every campaign. There's an interesting friction within Sanders' own camp between his professional political consultant class, who are controlling his campaign at this point, and the activists who feel like Bernie's our heart and soul, and they're going to do it no matter what, and this is their ongoing passion. And if you don't have good communication between those ranks, that I've seen activists excluded from movements for over one social media post, and it tends to be if they're women, because women, we are very verbose, and we will go into detail. I know I'm guilty of writing novellas on things that I'm passionate about, but the professional consultant class can be convicted felons. They can have really kind of scary personal lives if you know them. But we're not allowed to talk about them. They're the consultants that they're working for that second home in the Hamptons, and they're making political decisions based on making sure that brunch in Washington, D.C. isn't awkward for them after the campaign's over, because they all work on different teams floating around.
Right.
Activists, we're expected to be pure of heart, singularly dedicated to our cause, not earning a living doing this, despite having tremendous skill.
Right.
So and for the politicians, they are treated as the political class unless they came up through the activist system. So Bernie Sanders is often held to this much higher standard because he came up through the activist class.
Right.
Where Joe Biden came up through the political class. So we have those two divides right now, and frankly, I see that America has always gone on the side of the political class because they have more time, money, energy.
Is it a false
They
sense of
employ
security?
people. It is a false sense of security because you feel like, and the public trusts someone who's employed 365 days a year, 30 years plus in their profession, more than activists who need to go from campaign to campaign to campaign to campaign, chasing our idealism, versus someone who's of the professional political class. They're chasing that one candidate they work for a career, that one political committee that they work for. They are safe. Activists, we let it out raw, the Bernie Bros narrative where they're talking about that everyone was so fierce and cruel online. Well, that comes from that we're always fighting. Right. We don't have the luxury of worrying about if that other activist is going to give us, mad dog us at brunch, because frankly, we're not going to afford a $65 brunch in DC. Sure. That we're thinking about the next thing to fight for.
Right.
So that's the clash. Either you're on the activist side or you're on the professional political class.
Well, and so I want to kind of go into that, because can you break down the difference for us of an activist versus a lobbyist or a consultant? Because I think that everybody that jumps into presidential politics is kind of seen as a lobbyist, whether they're necessarily employed or not. I mean, there's always some direction that we're trying to influence or have a conversation of. So can you help us just kind of differentiate the difference between the activists and the lobbyists and consultants?
And to be honest, I've performed all three roles.
Sure.
So I'm going to start with the lobbyist role. The lobbyist role, we are telling the story of the clients who have chosen to hire us to represent them. The majority of my career, I have worked as a lobbyist for the people, and I take no pay. My lobbyist badge says unpaid lobbyist. But I'm still a lobbyist because I employ the skills, I employ the research, I get the meetings with the elected officials.
Sure.
That the lobbyists, when we're telling the story of the people that we represent, or the small business or the industry, we are framing them in the best possible light, and we are making the ask of what specific policy, and lobbying works best if you have a specific policy or a specific bill that you are targeted on. You still do a lot of schmoozing, a lot of cocktail partying, but that's your lobbyist job. The political consultant, which I've done as well, that is where we are taking the data, the research, the background information, and our gut instinct, and advising a candidates committee, PAC, ballot measure. This is how you conduct your business. The consultants, we also get into the day-to-day. Over the last 2 years, have been working with some federal candidates. I'm the person who flies in, talks to you, explains how to set up your paperwork, how to set up an office, how to start your fundraising, and I can give you a general primer on how fundraising works, how messaging works, how speech writing works. But most importantly, what I'm doing is, in that consultant role, I'm telling you, hire this friend of mine, hire that friend of mine. They're the specialists in it. But as a candidate has a smaller budget, they start with someone like me who can give them an overview, and more of what they do with their campaign is left up to their personal and professional judgment. And as they get more and more funding, and their first hire should be that fundraising manager after their consultant, then they're able to hire those people in more and more specialized roles. And then in my role, I can do more crisis management or more pitch in, this is where the deficit is in your campaign, and I'll fly there and I'll help you out. Now we get to the activist side, and the activist side is my heart and soul, and it's where I started. The activist side is where we build coalitions. It is where we talk to other groups, people serving in other roles. Generally, we're not paid unless, and this is where I advocate for that we should pay activists. If you're running essentially a campaign in your community and there's fundraising capacity, then you should be hired. And you should be able to demonstrate in your professional competency that you're worthy of getting paid. That very often the struggle in my career is, Christine, you came from being an activist. Why don't you just come sit on my campaign and do it for free? Right. We all have bills to pay. Right. And I don't disrespect someone for taking that pay. But very often in the activist community, pay is used via George Soros and Michael Bloomberg in the Democratic Party as a way of controlling dissent. So we had an explosion in 501c4 organizations during the Obama administration. We had a lot of great activists go to work for those. And then when crisis points happened in the movement, when Obama was deporter in chief, when Obama wouldn't take action on ending the war on drugs, we would go back to our activist allies who now had jobs and had health insurance for the first time, doing what they love. And 90% of the platform that they're working on are things that they're passionate about, including citizenship, including environmental issues. They would say, I love you, I support what you're working on, but I can't give that up. So then we've taken the activist and we've put them in the same category as the consultant. And now, having served all three rules, I'm a lot more patient and understanding about it. That as an activist in my early years, I used to attack the political consultant more than I do now. I do attack political consultants now for having poor judgment and a lack of maturity and a lack of foresight. But I still have some patience for the activist. And a lot of what I saw happen behind the scenes in 2016 with the Bernie Sanders campaign was a lot of activists who are like, Bernie Sanders is my heart and soul. When it's an anonymous vote between just me, the ballot box, and God, that's where I'm going. But professionally, because the funding for my organization comes from these groups, the funding for my organization comes from Harry Reid, there's nothing I can do for Bernie Sanders in a public role.
Right.
And so the power of money corrupts at all levels. And people are they're doing the best they can, but we have to create systems where you can do the best you can, but your family isn't going to end up losing its health insurance and you're out on the street.
And I think that's one of the biggest concerns right now with Joe Biden's campaign in terms of marijuana policy. Now, when we look at Bernie Sanders' campaign and what we foresee, in my opinion, watching objectively, he beat Bloomberg in just about every sense. And for me, I feel like there is a path for him to beat Biden. But there's this large group that says that nobody's going to beat Biden. If you are working with Bernie Sanders, how do you help him overcome some of these objections that are leading people towards tradition?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify that I do not work for Bernie Sanders. I'm not associated with his campaign in any way.
Disclaimer?
Yes, a very firm disclaimer. That all you can do at this point for Bernie Sanders is direct voter-to-voter contact. Do it in a way with humility and respect. That one of the failures that's happening And it happens in all campaigns. It's not just that one, but someone coming into your community from the outside saying, I know better than you. That community organizing is a conversation at its very best. And you start that conversation, but you're going door to door. That one of the differences was, I do not agree with this barnstorming concept that Bernie Sanders used this time, that mistaking large events, large attendance for turnout is not the same as conversations. It's not the same as a ride to the polls program. It's not the same as effective canvassing. It's not the same as a strong day of election GOTV program or a strong early vote program. That if your goal is to get Bernie Sanders elected, and it's still possible, just purely from the first ballot delegate numbers, go out there, continue to do your direct voter contact, but do it in a way that's respectful. That some of what I'm seeing online right now is too much anxiety, too much nervousness, too much feeling that this is on the line and we have to make it happen. You may have that internal sense, but you have to leave that in your car somewhere else before you go talk face to face with that voter. And one of the concepts that I appreciate in political organizing is called deep canvassing. And that is where you do have to hit that same house 4 or 5 times, have conversations, humanize the issue. And if you're going and you're barnstorming means you already have the people who believe to your way. Pushing out community organizing and deep canvassing, that's much harder work. That's a much harder ask. You have to hire more people. Frankly, a lot of people think that job sucks. And I've done that job. But you have to look at what the overall goal is. And sometimes, when I was in Iowa recently, I saw that Bernie Sanders had 8 mail pieces going out a day. That's the consultants saying you need 8 mail pieces a day. Do you really think that someone opening up their mailbox is going to go, well, I'm voting for him, he had 8 mail pieces with all pretty much the same message? That's the consultants blowing through a campaign's money.
Sure. Now, a lot of my conservative peers really appreciated what Tulsi Gabbard had to say. And when looking at the candidates, let's go 30 days back or so, 45 days back, when I was looking at the candidates, I felt like Tulsi had a real kind of middle of the road. She could pull from the left, she could pull from the right, and then it got lost. And so for myself and some of my peers, like, wow, here's a really interesting individual that talks about some issues that maybe some of the left didn't enjoy, but also some things that the right didn't either. But when I looked at just the marijuana policy and the rhetoric that which she was communicating, it seemed like here is somebody that really fits what people claim from both sides they're looking for. Is that something that you shared, or do you have more insights that you can help us understand where Tulsi kind of fell out in that campaign?
Well, first of all, I'm going to disclose that I did work for Tulsi Gabbard in October 2018. And she is one of my favorite leaders of all leaders I've had the opportunity in my career to ever get to know. I believe that she's sincere. I believe that the Democratic Party had an axe to grind against her. And the attitude toward her on the progressive side of the party was much, much warmer up until Bernie Sanders announced in February 2019 that there was still some question as to if Bernie was going to run, because you couldn't get a straight answer. And there were many of us feeling around because that was our top choice of campaign to go work for, because we knew it was going to be, of all the campaigns, those of us with enough of an inkling in politics, we knew he was going to be the best funded. And on fundraising alone, he's the best funded. So Tulsi launched her campaign in September 2018. I had the privilege I took her to her first marijuana grow in North Las Vegas. And we had a very thoughtful conversation, and she was very interested in all of the aspects of how we do this work and the jobs that we provide and the pain relief that we provide. That her interest was also in that the state of Hawaii is debating whether or not to legalize marijuana. Right. I had the opportunity, I was her body person. I took her to speak at several events in Las Vegas on 2 different occasions. And the message that she conveys is just so warm and so from the heart that I believed I was standing in the presence of a future president of the United States. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until Bernie got into the race that we like to say it was the establishment attacking Tulsi, sure, but it was the Sanders supporters also attacking Tulsi. And she does not owe it to anyone to surrender her piece of power, no matter who they are. She has a unique viewpoint to bring. She should be on that debate stage, despite the DNC changing those rules at the last minute. Absolutely. That we're focusing so much on her Assad policy that she met with Assad. She met with Assad, so did several other leaders that the United States seems to revere. Mm-hmm. Tulsi Gabbard did nothing that John McCain didn't do. Right. If you're going to send our troops into war, you owe that to those members of our military and to their families to look at the issue in its entirety. Right. And then let's talk about her vote. She voted present on the impeachment of Donald Trump. She took no position. Right. I personally think that we've wasted so much political capital on impeaching Trump, trying to create this distraction narrative that unless you're a political addict, you really don't care. Right. And the danger that the Democratic Party has right now is that in 2016, we were telling people, you vote for Donald Trump, it's the end of your life. Your life's going to go to shit. It's going to be terrible. Now we're going to go back to those same voters, and their lives are pretty much the same for 90% of America. There's no mushroom cloud. They're going to be able to say, oh, we impeached. So what? Most people don't care. And the whole point we're trying to make over that Trump's a sexist, all of this, all of that. You know what? Our culture elevated him on his television program. That the majority of people in this country are not political. They don't care. Right. Freakonomics has an interesting podcast called How Much Does the President Matter? Right. And the presidency, though significant, is not the whole game. And the Democrats control a big piece of that board, and the Democrats are failing Americans too. So the average American feels like it's all rigged against them. It's all going to fail anyway. So why even bother? They're tuned out. The largest portion of Americans making decisions about who we end up with never show up to the polls because we've created this division in our country. And now we've turned people off even further and further from politics by this divisive thing. One of the worst things that we did as Democrats was that Thanksgiving after the general election in 2016, when there were all those posts saying you need to go punch your Trump voting uncle in the face. Yeah.
We don't a lot of awkward table.
It used to be sacred in politics. We don't get in between people and their families. Right. It's just politics in the end, and that there are some things that are forever, and families are forever. And that was the biggest political misstep, telling people punch your uncle in the face. That's your uncle. That's who held you as a baby. That's who's going to be there holding your hand on the worst days of your life.
It got really bad, and I saw it not just in the states that I traveled, but just the stories that I heard. It created some real divide that I think was extremely concerning, because there was legitimate families leaving the Thanksgiving table. Yeah. And somebody mentioned to me that it felt like there hadn't been a divide that bad, and I think a little extreme, this bad since the Civil War. Of like brothers literally sitting at the same table being like, we don't sit at this table anymore. And that, to me, that was heartbreaking. And so how do we recover from that and move forward? Now we're in 2020.
We need to learn how to have civil conversations. That there was this advice given in the 80s and 90s, even in the 2000s, that we don't discuss money, religion, or politics.
Right.
But really at the core of who you are and how do you get to know someone if you don't know how they
three
feel?
biggest values.
Yeah. How do you get to know someone if you don't know how they feel about those things?
Right.
And going back to that, I give my parents absolute credit that they let me debate with them. And so I can come back to my father's Republican Thanksgiving table and have a civil conversation with him because it's rooted in love and respect for each other's intellectual capacity, that we're spending so much time calling the other side stupid.
Right.
And that's probably the most hurtful set of words that you could use. And that's not how you transform a family. That's not how you transform a community. That when we look at successful ways that we move communities to new policies, it's through love and respect. And we have to talk about who do you love, who do you respect. And yelling at someone that they need to get rid of their uncle is not how we do it. That telling your uncle that they're responsible for kids in cages isn't how we do it. And it's intellectually disingenuous because it took both sides of the political industrial process to put those cages there the day one that Trump arrived. So when I think about those kids in cages, which is the rallying point in the progressive political movement, who put those laws in place? Those laws were in place the day Trump showed up.
Right.
Those rules were in place and the infrastructure was in place the day Trump showed up. So let's talk about the controlled dissent that occurred within the Democratic Party, that we could not criticize President Obama for being deporter-in-chief.
Right.
That President Obama, those kids that got separated from their parents, they don't care who the president was. And we shouldn't care who the president was. We should attack the policy and dismantle it.
Right.
And going back to my presidential preference personally is Bernie Sanders, because I believe that he's willing to take the political fallout that would come from immediately suspending that policy.
Well, and before we jump into that, I want to talk about values and politics, because when we talk about the divide, one of the things that I overheard in a Walmart recently.
Okay.
So
we get our best political information from Walmart.
Some great policy. But values. I heard somebody say, well, are they a Republican or a Democrat? And another individual say, well, why does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
And that first individual said, well, that represents their values.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to it and trying to understand, yes, there's values in play there, but how quick are we to judge people on Republican and Democrat and then just assume all values that are associated with those parties? I think that's also extremely damaging when we're looking at this campaign and moving forward of, well, right now, you know, one of us could be a registered Republican and the other one can be a registered Democrat, and it's very easy to have a conversation and discuss these things objectively without saying, oh, you're a Republican, so you must hate women, you must be like Trump and all of that. How do we, I guess, let me ask you, how much do you believe values are tied to your political affiliation?
When I was younger, I used to believe it was everything. Now I don't.
Okay.
That each party has its platform, each candidate has its platform. Within the Democratic Party, there's a vast difference between them. That, interesting, when it comes to marijuana policy, the Republicans had an easier time passing legalization of marijuana onto their platform than the Democrats did.
Right.
The fiscally conservative Republicans I've had better conversations with about ending the for-profit prisons and ending a lot of the graft and corruption that comes from private contracting. or enforcing laws against white-collar criminals. Those were conversations that if I had not opened myself up to speaking with Republicans, I never would have had. And many of my best friends or people I often go to bat against, when we're having coffee after the fight is done, I would prefer to talk to people who don't 100% agree with me, because it makes me think my process is, how did I get there and why? Most often, it reaffirms my beliefs.
Sure.
But I still respect them. You are a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but we have had great conversations because I'm not thinking you're evil because of your party affiliation. And you're not thinking the same about me either. Many of my friends have given up on both parties and they're libertarians now.
Right. Well, I feel like marijuana has a great way of bringing both parties together.
It does.
Now, you were just mentioning that Bernie could face significant political fallout for not suspending his campaign.
Yes.
Why?
Because there's the expectation in the history of American politics that once someone is anointed, you drop back so that they can stop fighting you and they can start fighting the other team. This is a very different election because we're talking about the corporate moneyed elites versus the working people, and this may be our last stand fighting for Bernie Sanders. I hope that he doesn't draw back. I hope that he takes a fight all the way to the convention. And he was criticized for taking a fight all the way to the convention. But what he got in 2016 by taking that fight all the way to the convention against Hillary Clinton was he got the most progressive Democratic Party platform ever. I served on the National Platform Committee as the representative from the state of Nevada, and we got into the platform of living minimum wage. We had a healthcare debate. We attempted to debate ending fracking. Fracking is another issue that I've been amazed by how many Republicans I've been able to lobby on the issue, and they're like, bring me a bill. Or sometimes they will say to my face, I can't vote for this. Let me tell you why. But that honest conversation telling me why you can't vote for it, then that gives me the information of this is how they want to water it down and this is how we do it. And that politician having that conversation with me in their heart, I think really wants to be against fracking. But we're not creating a political environment where they can. And they're also looking at it that their number one goal and the goal of all those people they've hired and their political organization around them, that one vote means that your 30 closest people to you are all out of jobs. Right. So how do we create, and this is the terrible, bloody game of politics, that how do we create a situation where that Republican can maybe vote for our bill, vote for our issue, and they may have a slightly easier path to re-election. We have created in our divisive two-party system a situation where there's no political gain in voting and doing the right way.
But can you win in today's politics of just speaking your truth, your policies, without the attacking?
No. And the whole system is built up around that. But you go into politics to a certain degree because you are a gladiator, because you do want to fight the good fight. No one ends up serving in political office by accident.
Right. And
anyone who acts like they got there by accident is an absolute fool. Even if you got appointed, you had some political maneuvering in there. So sometimes, especially when I have to lobby more moderate Democrats who were, I'm not going to do this. It's like, I have to, frankly, have the conversation. It's like, your balls need to drop now. Either you're with us or you're against us. And now it's become less of a taboo to threaten to primary someone on the left. That the right actually had this shift that what a lot of people don't realize is the Democratic Party is still run very much by people in their 60s and their 70s. That one of the things the Tea Party did on the Republican side was they brought in younger people. So they may be more agile and able to better understand their communities, and in their individual communities, they're more inspiring. We like to attack Devin Nunes in California, but he's going to be around for a very long time. That now the Republicans have this younger group of elected officials. They're going to be around a longer time. They're going to have this longer institutional memory than the Democrats. Right. And the Democrats really should be looking at it going, this is our opportunity. We could bring in some younger blood, but is Chuck Schumer going to give up his seat? No. Is Nancy Pelosi going to give up her seat? No. We have to take these by force, and the Republican Party, they're 10 years ahead of us. They took their youth, and I hate to call it youth because it's really people in their 40s, they took those seats by force using the Tea Party as their mechanism. That our mechanism may be the revolution, but the revolution is getting kneecapped when Bernie Sanders is so unfairly attacked.
Right. So you're voting for Bernie?
Well, I'm going to give my qualifying statement here because I am the president of the Medicare for All. I'm the executive director of the Medicare for All Delegates PAC, which is an affiliated PAC for the purpose of electing delegates that will vote solely on the position of Medicare for All and the candidate best able to support Medicare for All at the national convention. I formed that PAC. I went to my annual FEC training and I was learning about delegate PACs and was like, that's how we do it. That one of the difficulties we had in 2016 at the national convention was there were directions from the Bernie Sanders campaign, and then there were directions from a lot of different groups of activists. We were successful in that we walked out during one of the nights of the convention, and we were successful in that we had the Stop TPP signs. All of that. TPP was another big issue that there's often the divide and conquer politics of our system, that there were both Democrats and Republicans against the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, and only Trump killed it. We would have had that if Clinton had been elected. If Clinton had been elected, I think that their end game was going to be passing it in the lame duck Congress between the election and the inauguration, and then Clinton's hands would have been free of it. And I actually got into quite a debate with Harry Reid live on Politico, that we asked him if he was going to force through TPP in a lame duck Congress. And he pivoted, and he said, did that answer your question? And I was honest, and I said, no.
Right.
And he told me I needed to go back to college. And I promptly got up and walked out.
Not to go back to college.
Yeah, not to go back to college, but I had enough. And I have paid a price in my career for walking out on the master, Harry Reid. And I have to say, a criticism of Bernie Sanders' campaign this cycle is he brought in a lot of people from Harry Reid's campaign who had negative thoughts on the activist class, because we actively fought Harry Reid. Right. Harry Reid in any other generation would have been a Republican. Right. And this goes back to that we have these people who are elected as Democrats who have Republican values. Harry Reid used to be the legislator of the year with the NRA. And when we talk about we want to divide and conquer families and people against each other on the issue of guns. And you look at there were a lot of NRA supporting candidates. The fastest money you can get running for office in Nevada, you can get $1,000 if you cash that check that comes in the mail to you from the NRA. I know, I ran for office. First check I got in the mail, I'm like all excited as candidate, open it up, it's like, oh crap, it's a $1,000 check from the NRA with an NRA survey suggesting how I should answer those questions to get the NRA endorsement. I refused to answer it. NRA sent me a certified letter next. Here's $1,000 check. And I look at it, it's like, I'm still not going to, in my belief system, I didn't believe I should give the NRA an answer. Right. because then they have nothing to use against me. That's a good political maneuver, but I don't want to be part of that. The next check came, and they'd gone from $1,000 to $3,000. Fill out the survey, along with, if you don't fill it out, we're going to assume that you don't share our values, and we're going to send out a mailer against you. Go ahead.
Right.
But there are Democrats I know, especially in the struggling small campaigns, they took that $1,000 because that helps you get started.
Right.
It doesn't make a big dent in Nevada because running a state assembly race in Nevada, you really need about $130,000 to be competitive. And that's compared to, I've helped state candidates in Arizona, and they need $8,000 to win. I helped a state candidate in Florida, and her price was about $30,000. So that's where the political consultant class comes in, that you go in and you realistically tell someone this is how much money you're going to need to run and win a race. But talking about our values, we have to look at the whole picture. And I would rather talk with a politician that may not be on the same side as me, but is willing to communicate to me what their values are and has been thoughtful about their values, because that's someone I can work with.
Absolutely.
We're going to go get Diane now.
We're going to go get Diane.
Yes.
Diane Russell, Conservative of the Year.
So it's been a lovely week doing marijuana policy and businessing and all of that up in lovely New England. And we're going to continue to work.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for allowing me to join you.
Yeah, and this is just like a snapshot of some of the conversations we've had, and we're going to have other conversations, especially more like this was like
all
politics is
all the best conversations happen right here.
Yeah, and dealing with Rye's Trump impersonations all week has been
Only
little.
the best.
I think our generations are also just constantly evolving.
Right.
And that evolving is not shame. That, and I'm willing to look at a politician that maybe took a really bad vote when the culture was different. Tell me how you've changed. Tell me what led you to where you are today. That there's a lot of pressure within the Democratic Party to conform to the norm. And the norm they're selling us is Joe Biden right now. And the Republican, frankly, in many ways, are leaner and meaner than us because they went through their revolution of not having to conform to the norms 10 years ago with the Tea Party.
Right.
And then they ended up with Trump. Where are we going to end up?
Mark Cuban.
Oh, Lord. Okay, I need to go cough off camera.
Thank you for joining.